Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Beth Hendricks stood in her pristine kitchen, watching the morning sun stream through custom-installed skylights that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in their Malibu home screamed success, from the Italian marble countertops to the infinity pool that seemed to spill into the Pacific Ocean. At 34, she had what most women would kill for: a successful husband, financial security, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. But perfection, Beth had learned, was often just an expensive veneer hiding rot underneath. She'd met Jason Hendricks 8 years ago when she was still working as a private investigator for a firm in downtown LA. He was a real estate mogul even then, 28 and hungry for more. She was investigating insurance fraud at one of his developments, and instead of being defensive, he'd been impressed by her thoroughness. "You're wasted on other people's problems," he told her over dinner. "Work for me instead." Within a year, they were married. Within 2, Beth had left her PI career to manage Jason's security operations, corporate espionage prevention, background checks on potential partners, the kind of work that kept a multi-million-dollar empire safe. She was good at it, maybe too good. Jason often joked that she could find dirt on anyone within 48 hours. He'd stopped joking about it recently. Beth picked up her phone to check the time and saw Jason's message. "Landing in Kenya tonight. Safari starts tomorrow. Can't wait." Attached was a photo of him grinning next to a woman with platinum blonde hair and surgically enhanced everything else. Candy Richards, 25, former Instagram influencer turned lifestyle coach, with a business model that seemed to involve sleeping with married men. Beth had known about her for 3 months. The safari was supposed to be their anniversary trip. Beth had planned every detail: the luxury camp, the private guides, the romantic dinners under African stars. She'd even learned basic Swahili phrases to surprise Jason. Instead, he'd taken his mistress and sent Beth a text saying he needed space to think about their marriage. Beth's phone buzzed with another message. "Having fun without you. Face blowing a kiss." She stared at the screen, feeling something cold and calculating settle in her chest. Jason had no idea who he was playing with. During her PI years, Beth had built a network that spanned 3 continents. She had contacts in places Jason couldn't even pronounce, people who owed her favors from cases that had saved careers, marriages, and lives. Most importantly, Jason had forgotten that Beth knew everything about his business. Every account, every deal, every dirty little secret he thought was buried. She'd helped bury most of them. Beth walked to her home office and pulled out a secure laptop she hadn't used in 2 years. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory, accessing encrypted files and contact lists that most people would never know existed. She had work to do. Chapter 2. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Beth's past wasn't something she often discussed, even with Jason. Most people assumed she'd been some sort of corporate security consultant before marriage, which was technically true but missed the more interesting parts of her story. She'd grown up in Nevada, daughter of a casino security chief who taught her that everyone had secrets and most people were terrible at hiding them. By 18, she was working part-time for a PI firm while studying criminology. By 25, she was running her own investigations and had developed a reputation for cases others couldn't crack. Her specialty had been unfaithful spouses, but her clients were usually the cheaters, not the betrayed. Wealthy men who wanted to know if their wives were planning to take half their assets. Politicians whose opponents were digging into their personal lives. CEOs worried about blackmail. Beth had been very good at making problems disappear. She'd also been very good at remembering everything she learned. Now, scrolling through old case files, Beth smiled. 3 years ago, she'd helped Jason's business partner, Blake Gates, cover up an affair that would have cost him his marriage and his stake in their development company. Blake owed her, and he had access to things that could make Jason's life very complicated. Her phone rang. "Beth, it's Shelby Harrington." Shelby was another old contact, now working as a journalist for a major financial publication. They'd met when Beth was investigating a Ponzi scheme, and Shelby had helped expose it while protecting Beth's client's involvement. "I need a favor," Beth said without preamble. "Must be serious if you're calling in chips from the old days. What's Jason done now?" Shelby had never liked Jason, claimed he gave her slimy used car salesman vibes, despite his success. "He's in Kenya with his girlfriend, using money from our joint account to fund a romantic getaway. I wanted to do some digging into his recent business dealings. Specifically, that development deal in Riverside." There was silence on the other end. "Beth, you know I can't just. The Riverside deal involves federal tax incentives for low-income housing. But Jason's been using shell companies to inflate costs and pocket the difference. I have documentation." Another pause. That's federal fraud, Beth." "I know, but I'm not ready to hand it over to the FBI yet. I want Jason to come home first. I want him to think he's won. And then," Beth looked out at the ocean, remembering why she'd fallen in love with this house, this life, this man who'd turned out to be someone else entirely. "Then I destroy him." After ending the call with Shelby, Beth made 3 more calls. The first was to Blake Gates, who agreed to help after she reminded him of certain photographs that existed in her personal files. The second was to a contact in the State Department who owed her a favor from a case involving a senator's son. The third call was to Jason's mother. "And it's Beth. I need to tell you something about Jason." Chapter 3. Pieces on the board. The call from Ann Hendricks came exactly 57 minutes later, just as Beth had predicted. Jason's mother was many things: overbearing, manipulative, obsessed with appearances, but she wasn't stupid. She knew her son better than anyone, including his capacity for self-destruction when he thought he was being clever. "Beth, honey, what's this about Kenya? Jason called me, said you were having marital problems, but he didn't mention traveling with anyone." Beth had always liked Anne, despite the woman's obvious preference for her son in any conflict. Anne had built a catering empire from nothing after her husband left when Jason was 12, and she understood what it meant to be betrayed by someone you trusted. "He's with Candy Richards. Has been for months. They're using our anniversary safari as their romantic getaway." The silence stretched so long Beth wondered if the call had dropped. "That little gold-digging whore," and finally said, her usual genteel facade cracking. "I told him she was trouble when he brought her to the Christmas party." "You met her?" "Oh, honey, I thought you knew." She was practically sitting in his lap all night, talking about how inspiring he was. "I assumed she was some business associate until I saw her trying to steal champagne flutes from the bar." Beth filed this information away. Jason had been cheating longer than she'd realized, and he'd been stupid enough to parade Candy in front of his mother. The man who'd built a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars was apparently incapable of conducting a discreet affair. "And I need your help with something. But first, you should know that Jason's been using company funds for personal expenses, including this trip." "What kind of company funds?" "The kind that attract federal attention. The kind that could land him in prison." Beth heard Anne's sharp intake of breath. The older woman might spoil her son, but she'd worked too hard to build respectability to watch him destroy it with his stupidity. "What do you need me to do?" "Call him." Crying. "Tell him I've hired investigators, that I'm going after everything in the divorce. Make him think I'm acting out of emotion instead of strategy. I need him to come home feeling confident. And then I show him what happens when you underestimate a woman who used to hunt people for a living." After Anne agreed to make the call, Beth returned to her laptop. Her real work was just beginning. The Riverside development was Jason's pet project, a mixed-use complex that was supposed to provide affordable housing while generating substantial profits through federal tax incentives. On paper, it looked legitimate. In reality, Jason had created a web of shell companies to inflate construction costs, pocket the difference, and still claim the full tax benefits. Beth had the real financial records, of course. As head of security, she'd been involved in setting up the companies, though Jason thought she didn't understand the full scope of what they were doing. He'd underestimated her again, assuming that because she wasn't an accountant, she couldn't follow the money trail. She'd been following it for 6 months, building a case that could destroy him while pretending to be the dutiful wife who just wanted to keep his businesses safe. Her phone buzzed with a text from Shelby. "Holy shit, Beth. This Riverside thing is bigger than you said. How deep does it go?" Beth smiled and typed back. "Deep enough to bury him. But we're just getting started." Then she opened another encrypted file, this one containing information about Candy Richards that the girl's Instagram followers would find very interesting. Like the fact that Candy was actually Candace Richardson from Toledo, Ohio, whose lifestyle coaching certification came from a weekend seminar she'd attended while working at a strip club. Or that she was currently married to a man named Tommy Wallace, a fact she'd hidden from Jason and her social media presence. Beth had found Tommy 3 weeks ago, working construction in Phoenix, and very interested to learn about his wife's new career in California. He was also very interested in the community property laws that meant he was entitled to half of everything Candy earned during their marriage, including whatever she was planning to get from Jason. Her laptop chimed with an incoming encrypted message from her State Department contact. "Package delivered. Your friend's visa situation is about to become very complicated." Beth leaned back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Jason and Candy were about to discover that their romantic African getaway was turning into something very different. Her phone rang. It was and she was crying. "I called him, Beth." He laughed. "He actually laughed when I told him you were hiring investigators. He said you were too soft to really hurt him, that you'd never had the guts to play hardball." Beth felt the last of her conflicted feelings about what she was planning evaporate. "Thank you, and you've been very helpful." "Beth, what are you going to do to my son?" Beth looked out at the ocean again, watching the sun set over water that would soon reflect nothing but darkness. "I'm going to teach him the difference between being soft and being patient." Chapter 4. The First Move. Jason's confidence proved to be his biggest weakness. While he was posting photos of himself and Candy on safari, comparing the experience to conquering new territories, Beth was methodically dismantling the life he thought was secure. The first domino fell at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, when the IRS received an anonymous tip about irregularities in the Riverside Development's tax filings. The tip included detailed financial records, construction contracts, and a helpful flowchart showing exactly how money had been moved between shell companies. Beth knew it would take weeks for the investigation to gain momentum, but the clock was now ticking on Jason's freedom. The second domino was more personal. Tommy Wallace received a FedEx package containing photos of his wife with Jason, credit card receipts from expensive dinners, and a first-class plane ticket to Los Angeles with a note. "Thought you should know where your wife is spending your anniversary." Beth had researched Tommy carefully. He was a former amateur boxer who'd done 2 years for assault after catching his previous girlfriend with another man. He was also broke, unemployed, and had nothing left to lose. The third domino was professional. Blake Gates called an emergency board meeting, ostensibly to discuss concerning financial irregularities in their latest development project. What he actually discussed was Jason's unauthorized use of company resources for personal travel, backed up by documentation Beth had provided. "I don't want to believe Jason would steal from us," Blake told the other board members, his voice heavy with manufactured concern. "But these expenses are clearly personal, and he authorized them without board approval." The board voted to freeze Jason's access to company accounts pending a full audit. Beth monitored it all from her home office, watching her carefully laid plans unfold with the precision of a master chess player. But the real masterstroke was still coming. Her phone rang at 2 p.m. It was her contact at the State Department. "It's done," he said simply. "Mr. Hendricks and Ms. Richards have been flagged for visa violations. Kenyan authorities will be detaining them for questioning when they attempt to leave the country." "How long?" "Depends on how cooperative they are. Could be days, could be weeks. International bureaucracy moves slowly, especially when there are questions about financial improprieties." Beth had learned that Jason and Candy had lied on their visa applications, claiming their trip was purely tourism when they'd actually been discussing potential real estate investments with local contacts. It was a minor violation that normally would be overlooked, but when combined with the flag Beth had arranged, her laptop chimed with a news alert. The financial journalist Shelby had been busy. Federal investigation launched into California Development Company was the headline, and while it didn't name Jason specifically, anyone in the industry would know exactly which company and which CEO were being discussed. Beth's phone buzzed with the first panicked text from Jason. "What the hell is happening? My accounts are frozen." She replied, "I have no idea. Are you okay? When are you coming home? They won't let us leave." Some bullshit about visa problems. "Beth, I need you to call Blake. Get this sorted out." "Of course, darling. I'll fix everything." But she had no intention of fixing anything. Instead, she sent Blake a message. "Jason is trying to contact you from Kenya. Under no circumstances should you accept his calls or provide any assistance. The FBI investigation must proceed without interference." Blake replied immediately. "Understood. This is actually going better than we planned." Beth smiled at that. Blake thought he was using the situation to eliminate a business rival. He had no idea that Beth had been planning his downfall too. But that was a problem for next week. Her phone rang again. This time it was Candy, calling from Jason's phone. "Beth, this is Candy, Jason's friend. We're having some trouble here, and Jason thought maybe you could help." Beth almost laughed at the girl's transparent attempt to manipulate her. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" Jason didn't mention he was traveling with anyone. Look, there's been some kind of mistake with our paperwork and they won't let us leave Kenya. Jason needs you to wire money for lawyers." "How much money?" $50,000. To start. $50,000? For visa problems? Beth injected just the right amount of shock into her voice. "What exactly were you two doing over there?" The silence stretched long enough for Beth to know that Candy was beginning to understand how precarious her situation really was. "Just tourism. Safari stuff. But they're saying we violated some regulation about business activities." "Business activities?" "Jason told me this was a personal trip. A time for him to think about our marriage." Another long pause. "I should let you talk to Jason." "Yes, I think you should." When Jason's voice came on the line, Beth could hear the strain underneath his usual bluster. "Beth, baby, this is all just a misunderstanding. Some bureaucratic nonsense. I need you to wire money to a lawyer here, so we can get this sorted out." "Jason, are you in trouble? Real trouble?"
No.
"It's just they're asking questions about meetings I had here. Business meetings. Apparently, I should have declared them on my visa application." "What kind of business meetings?" "Nothing important. Just some preliminary discussions about potential investments." "But Beth, they're talking about holding us for weeks while they investigate. I can't afford to be away from the company that long, not with the Riverside project in its final phase." Beth looked at her laptop screen, where multiple news alerts were now reporting on the federal investigation into the Riverside project. "Don't worry about the company, darling. I'm sure everything will be fine while you're gone. Blake is handling things." "Blake is?" "Beth, I need you to call him right now. Tell him not to make any major decisions without me." "Of course. I'll call him immediately." "And Beth? The money? I really need you to wire that money." "How much did you say?" $50,000. Actually, the lawyer says it might be more. Maybe $100,000. "Beth, I know it's a lot, but I can't stay here. I have too much to lose." Beth smiled, looking out at the ocean where the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and red. "You're absolutely right, Jason. You do have too much to lose." Chapter 5. The walls close in. The beauty of a well-executed plan, Beth reflected, was that the target often helped their own destruction. Jason's panicked phone calls were becoming more frequent and more desperate, each one revealing just how much he didn't understand about his situation. "Beth, something's wrong," he said during their third call of the day. "I tried to access our joint account to wire my own money, but it's not working." "That's strange. Let me check my laptop." Beth pulled up their bank account, which she'd quietly separated the day before. Her half was now in a new account at a different bank, while Jason's half remained frozen due to the IRS investigation. "Oh no, Jason. There's a hold on the account. It says federal investigation pending." "Federal investigation? Into our personal account?" "I don't know. Maybe it's connected to the company audit?" Blake mentioned something about reviewing all financial connections. The silence on Jason's end was profound. Beth could practically hear him connecting dots he should have connected months ago. Blake mentioned, "You've been talking to Blake. He called me honey. He's very concerned about you. Apparently there are questions about the Riverside project and with you being unavailable." What kind of questions? Beth had been waiting for this moment. Tax questions mostly. Something about the shell companies and whether expenses were properly categorized. But I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Beth. Jason's voice was carefully controlled now. "I need you to do something for me. Go to my office, to the safe behind the painting. There's a USB drive in there labeled backup files. I need you to destroy it." Destroy it? Jason, what's on it? Just old files. Nothing important. But if the investigators find it, they might misinterpret what they see. Beth already had a copy of everything on that drive, of course. She'd made it 6 months ago when she first started documenting Jason's crimes. But she wasn't about to tell him that. "Of course, darling. I'll take care of it right away. And Beth, don't mention the drive to anyone. Not Blake, not lawyers, no one. I understand. I'll protect you, Jason. I always have." After ending the call, Beth allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Jason was now actively asking her to destroy evidence, which meant he knew exactly how much trouble he was in. It also meant he was trusting her to save him, which was perhaps the biggest miscalculation of his life. Her laptop chimed with a message from Shelby. "Holy shit, Beth. Your husband is front-page news." Beth opened the financial publications website to find Jason's photo under the headline, "Real Estate Mogul Detained in Kenya as Federal Investigation Expands." The article detailed the IRS investigation, the frozen company accounts, and Jason's inability to return to the United States to address the allegations. It also mentioned that Jason's wife, described as a former private investigator with expertise in corporate security, had been instrumental in organizing the company's financial documentation systems. Beth smiled at that detail. She'd specifically asked Shelby to include it, knowing that readers would draw their own conclusions about who had provided the evidence for the investigation. Her phone rang. It was Ann Hendricks, and she was no longer crying. "Beth, I just saw the news. What exactly is happening to my son?" "He's going to prison, Ann. The only question is for how long." "And you're responsible for this?" "Jason is responsible for this. I'm just making sure he faces consequences for his actions." And was quiet for a long moment. "What about Candy? What happens to her?" "That's an interesting question. Let me put you on hold for a moment." Beth had been monitoring Tommy Wallace's progress through her contacts, and the news was better than she'd hoped. Tommy had arrived in Kenya that morning, armed with marriage certificates and legal documents proving his claim to half of Candy's assets. He'd also brought photos of their wedding and evidence that she'd never filed for divorce despite telling everyone she was single. Kenyan authorities, already suspicious of Candy's visa claims, were now holding her for questioning about potential marriage fraud in addition to the business violations. "Ann, Tommy Wallace is in Kenya. Candy's husband." "Her husband? She's married. Has been for 3 years. She's been committing immigration fraud, marriage fraud, and possibly bigamy, depending on what she promised Jason." "Oh my God. Jason doesn't know." Jason thought he was dealing with a single woman whose biggest secret was a few enhanced photos on Instagram. Instead, he's trapped in a foreign country with a criminal who's about to cost him everything he's ever worked for. And was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was subdued. "Beth, I know my son isn't perfect, but he's still my son. Is there any way to minimize the damage?" "There might be. But it would require Jason to admit what he's done and cooperate fully with investigators. It would also require him to make certain financial arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind that ensure the people he's hurt are compensated, including his wife." "You want a divorce settlement. I want justice, and..." Jason stole federal tax money intended for low-income housing. He used company funds for personal expenses. He committed fraud on multiple levels while expecting his wife to help cover it up. A divorce settlement is the least of his problems. Beth's other phone buzzed with a text from her State Department contact. Your husband is requesting consular assistance, claiming he's the victim of a setup. Should we expedite his case? Beth typed back, standard procedures only. No special treatment. Her main phone rang again. Jason, calling from Kenya. Beth, listen to me very carefully. Someone is sabotaging me. The news articles, the timing of the investigation, the visa problems, it's all too coordinated to be coincidental. Who would do that to you, Jason? I don't know. A competitor, maybe. Or someone trying to take over the company. But Beth, I need you to hire a private investigator. Someone good. I need to know who's behind this. Beth almost laughed. A private investigator? Jason, that's expensive. And with our accounts frozen, use your personal account. The one from before we got married. I know you still have it. Jason, that account has maybe $10,000 in it. Then use whatever you have to. Beth, my entire life is falling apart. Our life is falling apart. I need to know who's doing this to us. Okay, honey, I'll find someone. The best investigator I can afford. Thank you. And Beth, I love you. I know I haven't been perfect, but I love you. We're going to get through this. I love you too, Jason. After ending the call, Beth walked to her window and looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. In a few hours, it would be dawn in Kenya, and Jason would wake up to another day of understanding exactly how trapped he really was. Beth had indeed hired the best private investigator she could afford. Herself. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. Day 4 of Jason's Kenyan nightmare brought developments that even Beth hadn't fully anticipated. Her web of consequences was now expanding beyond her original plan, creating a momentum that felt almost alive. Tommy Wallace had proven to be more resourceful than expected. Not only had he confronted Candy with evidence of her deception, but he'd also started talking to Kenyan authorities about her social media presence and the money she'd been flashing around. When investigators traced her recent expenditures back to Jason's accounts, they discovered a pattern of what appeared to be money laundering through luxury purchases. Beth, they're saying Candy's been buying expensive jewelry and immediately reselling it, Jason said during their morning call. His voice sounded hoarse, defeated. They think we're washing money through Kenyan dealers. Are you? Beth asked innocently. No. She likes nice things. I bought her some gifts. How many gifts, Jason? I don't know. A few. Maybe a lot. Beth, they have receipts for over $200,000 in jewelry purchases in the last month alone. Beth whistled softly. She'd known about the jewelry, but seeing the total amount confirmed just how reckless Jason had become. $200,000? In 1 month. She said it was investments. That luxury goods hold their value better than stocks. Jason, did you really believe that a 25-year-old Instagram influencer had developed a sophisticated investment strategy involving African jewelry markets? The silence told her everything. Jason had been thinking with something other than his brain for months, and now reality was crashing down around him. There's more, he continued. Blake's called an emergency board meeting. He's trying to remove me as CEO. Can he do that? With cause, yes. And my being detained in a foreign country while under federal investigation probably counts as cause. Beth pulled up the news on her laptop. Blake had indeed called a board meeting, but his motivations weren't entirely pure. Beth's investigation into Blake's own activities had revealed some interesting financial irregularities that she planned to expose once Jason was dealt with. But for now, Blake was a useful tool. What can I do to help? She asked. I need you to attend the meeting. As my proxy. You still have corporate authorization for security matters. Of course. When is it? Tomorrow at 10. And Beth, I need you to vote against Blake's motion. Whatever he proposes, vote no. Beth smiled. Jason was asking her to save his position as CEO of a company he'd been systematically defrauding. I'll do my best, honey. After ending the call, Beth made her own preparations for the board meeting. But her agenda was very different from Jason's. That evening, her doorbell rang. Standing on her doorstep was a woman she'd never seen before but immediately recognized from her research, Margie Bowers, Tommy Wallace's sister and a family law attorney from Phoenix. Mrs. Hendricks? I'm here about Candy Richards. Or should I say, Candace Wallace? Beth invited her in, curious about this unexpected development. My brother asked me to come talk to you, Margie explained. He's in Kenya trying to sort out his wife's mess, but he wanted to make sure you understood the legal implications of what's happening. What implications? Margie pulled out a folder. Candy has been using her husband's money to purchase assets that legally belong to my brother under community property laws. If they're divorced in Kenya, those laws don't apply. But if they're divorced in the United States, Tommy gets half of everything she acquired during the marriage, including whatever she's been getting from your husband, which means Tommy has a claim on property that technically belongs to your marital community. Beth stared at the papers, seeing new possibilities unfold. You're saying Tommy could sue Jason for the money he gave to Candy. I'm saying Tommy could potentially claim half of anything Candy received from your husband, which could complicate your own divorce proceedings considerably. Unless? Margie smiled. Unless certain arrangements were made in advance. Agreements that protected your interests while ensuring Tommy got what he was legally entitled to. What kind of arrangements? The kind that require your husband to make very substantial financial concessions to avoid a three-way legal battle that could drag on for years. Beth looked at the papers again, realizing that her revenge was becoming even more comprehensive than she'd planned. Jason wouldn't just lose his freedom and his company. He'd also lose his fortune to a web of legal claims he'd never seen coming. I think Tommy and I could work something out, she said finally. Good. Because there's one more thing you should know. Candy's pregnant. Beth felt the world shift slightly. Pregnant. Found out yesterday. Told the Kenyan authorities it was why she'd been so sick during questioning. She's claiming Jason is the father and demanding he provide financial support. Is he the father? Based on Tommy's timeline, probably. But that means your husband is about to become responsible for child support to a woman who's married to someone else, while being investigated for federal crimes that could send him to prison for decades. Beth walked to her window, looking out at the ocean where storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Jason's perfect crime had turned into a perfect catastrophe, and it was about to get worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Beth, I need to tell you something. Candy's pregnant. Beth typed back, Congratulations, darling. I'm sure everything will work out fine. But as she watched the storm approaching from the west, Beth knew that everything working out fine depended entirely on one's definition of fine. For Jason, nothing would ever be fine again. Chapter 7. The Board Meeting. The boardroom at Hendricks Development had never felt more hostile. Beth arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that projected both professionalism and quiet authority. She'd spent 8 years building relationships with these people, and now it was time to collect on that investment. Blake Gates sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with the satisfaction of a man who thought he was about to win everything. The other board members, Stuart Goodwin, Colin Bacon, and Irene Farmer, looked uncomfortable but resigned. They'd obviously been briefed on the situation. Beth, Blake said as she entered. I'm glad you could make it. Though I have to say, I'm surprised Jason asked you to represent him given the circumstances. What circumstances are those, Blake? The federal investigation. The questions about financial improprieties. The fact that he's currently detained in Kenya under suspicious circumstances. Beth took her seat at the table, placing a leather portfolio in front of her. Those are certainly concerning developments. I'm hoping you can help me understand how we got here. Stuart Goodwin, the company's CFO, cleared his throat. Beth, we've discovered irregularities in several recent projects. Expenses that can't be properly accounted for, transfers between accounts that lack documentation, the use of shell companies for unclear purposes. I see. And these irregularities occurred without board oversight. They occurred without board knowledge, Blake said firmly. Jason has been making unilateral decisions and hiding the financial implications from the rest of us. That's a serious accusation. Beth opened her portfolio and removed a thick folder. I've brought some documents that might help clarify the timeline of these decisions. She distributed copies of board meeting minutes going back 3 years, with certain sections highlighted in yellow. These are meetings where the board specifically approved the creation of subsidiary companies for tax purposes, she said. And these sections show Blake seconding Jason's motions and voting in favor of the financial structures now being questioned. Blake's confident expression flickered. Those approvals were based on incomplete information. Were they? Because I also brought these. Beth removed another set of documents. Email chains between Blake and Jason discussing the tax benefits of the shell company structure. Detailed financial projections that Blake reviewed and approved. Correspondence with attorneys about the legal implications of the arrangements. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Blake, Irene Farmer said slowly, you told us you weren't involved in setting up these companies. I wasn't involved in the operational details, Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Beth smiled and removed a third set of documents. These are bank signature cards for the shell companies. Blake's signature appears on several of them, authorizing him to make transfers and withdrawals. What exactly are you suggesting, Beth? Colin Bacon asked. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Blake was Jason's partner in creating the financial structure now being investigated by the FBI. He had full knowledge of how money was being moved between companies, and he had signing authority on the accounts involved. Stuart Goodwin was rapidly reviewing the documents. Blake, if this is accurate, you're as exposed as Jason is. More exposed, actually, Beth said, because Jason's been in Kenya for 4 days, while Blake has been here making transfers and accessing accounts that are now under federal scrutiny. Blake's face had gone pale. Beth, what do you want? I want the truth. About Jason's activities, about your involvement, and about what's really been happening at this company. And if I tell the truth, then maybe we can find a way to minimize the damage to everyone involved. The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling as board members reviewed Beth's evidence. There's something else, Beth said quietly. Stuart, when was the last time you reviewed the employee pension fund investments? Stuart frowned. Last quarter. Why? Because I think you'll find some interesting transfers from that fund to accounts controlled by Blake and Jason. Transfers that weren't properly authorized by the pension fund trustees. That's impossible, Stuart said, but he was already reaching for his phone. The pension fund is sacred. Neither of them would touch it. I'm afraid they've been doing more than touching it. They've been using it as a personal piggy bank for almost 2 years. Blake stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. Actually, Beth said, it's just beginning. Because there's one more thing you all need to know. She removed a final document from her portfolio. This is a plea agreement that Jason signed from Kenya yesterday. He's cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She let that sink in for a moment. He's providing complete documentation of all financial crimes committed by this company, including detailed information about Blake's involvement and the pension fund violations. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning with search warrants. You're lying, Blake said, but his voice was shaking. Am I? Stuart, check your secure email. I think you'll find a message from the federal prosecutor's office requesting immediate preservation of all company financial records. Stuart's face went white as he checked his phone. I think, Beth said calmly, it's time for Blake to resign. And for this board to begin cooperating with authorities to minimize the damage to innocent employees and investors. What about Jason? Irene asked. Jason will face the consequences of his actions. But he'll do it with a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Blake, on the other hand, she left the sentence unfinished, but everyone in the room understood the implications. Blake was still standing, swaying slightly. This was all Jason's idea. I was just following his lead. I'm sure that's exactly what you'll tell the FBI tomorrow, Beth said. I'm also sure they'll be very interested in the fact that you called this board meeting to remove Jason at exactly the same time he was providing evidence against you. You planned this, Blake said. This whole thing is some kind of setup. Beth gathered her documents and stood up. No, Blake. Jason planning to defraud the federal government was not a setup. You agreeing to help him steal from employee pension funds was not a setup. The two of you being too arrogant to realize that someone was documenting your crimes was not a setup. She paused at the door. That was just stupidity. Chapter 8. The Final Trap. The FBI arrived at Hendrick's development at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, just as Beth had promised. She watched from her car across the street as agents filed into the building carrying boxes and computer equipment. Blake Gates emerged in handcuffs an hour later, his confident facade replaced by the hollow stare of a man who'd realized too late that he'd been outplayed. Beth's phone rang as she watched the perp walk. "You destroyed him," Jason said from Kenya. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Blake destroyed himself. I just documented it." "And me? What did I do to deserve this?" Beth was quiet for a long moment, watching investigators carry out boxes of evidence that would keep federal prosecutors busy for months. "You underestimated me, Jason. You thought I was just a pretty face you'd rescued from a boring career. You thought I'd be grateful enough to overlook anything, forgive anything, enable anything. Beth, you took my anniversary trip and gave it to your mistress. You used money I helped you earn to fund your affair. You asked me to destroy evidence of your crimes. You laughed when your mother told you I was finally fighting back. I never meant to hurt you." "Yes, you did. You meant to hurt me, humiliate me, and then convince me it was my fault for not being understanding enough. But you made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" "You forgot that I used to hunt people like you for a living." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "How long have you been planning this?" Jason asked finally. 6 months. Since I first discovered your financial crimes. The affair was just the catalyst that made me stop protecting you. 6 months. I documented everything, Jason. Every fraudulent transfer, every shell company, every penny you stole from low-income housing funds. I built a case that would destroy you, and then I waited for you to give me a reason to use it. And Candy? Tommy Wallace showing up in Kenya? Candy lied to you about being single. I just made sure her husband found out where she was and what she was doing. Did you really think a woman who committed marriage fraud to get into this country wouldn't lie to you about other things? Another long silence. The baby, Jason said quietly, might not even be yours. Tommy's provided the FBI with a very interesting timeline of his wife's activities. But congratulations anyway. Child support payments from federal prison should be an interesting challenge. How much? Jason's voice was barely a whisper. How much what? How much did you know? How much did you plan? Beth watched the last of the evidence boxes being loaded into FBI vehicles. I knew enough. I planned enough. The question now is what you're going to do with the rest of your life. What do you mean? Your plea agreement requires full cooperation and complete financial disclosure. That includes compensating victims of your crimes. It also includes making arrangements for your personal assets. Our personal assets. Not anymore. I filed for divorce yesterday. California's community property laws are very clear about assets acquired through criminal activity. I'm also claiming financial fraud as grounds, which affects the distribution calculation. You're taking everything. I'm taking what I'm legally entitled to, plus compensation for the financial crimes you committed using marital assets. Your lawyers can explain the details. Beth, please. We can work this out. I'll get counseling, I'll change, I'll do whatever you want. What I want is for you to serve your sentence, pay your debts, and stay out of my life. What I want is for you to understand that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're too smart to get caught. And if I don't cooperate, if I fight the divorce, fight the charges. Beth smiled, though Jason couldn't see it. Then you'll spend the next decade in federal court, fighting multiple fraud charges, a 3-way divorce proceeding with Candy and Tommy, child support claims, civil suits from pension fund victims, and probably tax evasion charges I haven't even explored yet. You destroy my whole life. Jason, I didn't destroy your life. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Shelby. Blake Gates indicted on 47 counts of federal fraud. Your husband's cooperation deal is front-page news again. I have to go, Jason. I have a life to rebuild. Beth, wait. Please. I love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of me. The convenient wife who cleaned up your messes and asked no questions. The woman who made you feel powerful because she was smart enough to be dangerous, but loyal enough to never use it against you. That's not true. It's completely true. And Jason? When you get out of prison in 8 to 10 years, if you're very lucky, I want you to remember something. What? I was never the woman you thought I was. I was always the woman you should have been afraid of. Beth ended the call and drove home, where real estate agents were already placing for sale signs on the Malibu property. She decided to start over somewhere Jason would never think to look for her. Somewhere she could build a life with a man who would never be stupid enough to underestimate her. Her phone rang one more time. It was Ann Hendricks. Beth, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For teaching my son that intelligence without wisdom is just elaborate stupidity. He needed to learn that lesson, even if it destroys him. Beth looked out at the ocean one last time, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and red. Everyone needs to learn that lesson eventually, and most people just don't have such an expensive education. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 6 months later, Beth stood in the kitchen of her new home in Asheville, North Carolina, reading the morning news on her tablet. The headline read, "Real estate mogul sentenced to 12 years for federal fraud conspiracy." Jason had ultimately received a longer sentence than originally negotiated because he tried to recant his cooperation agreement and blame everything on Blake. The judge had been unimpressed with his strategy of taking responsibility and then immediately refusing to accept consequences. Blake Gates had received 15 years. The pension fund victims were slowly being compensated through asset forfeiture, though they'd never recover their full losses. Candy Richards, or rather, Candace Wallace, had been deported back to the United States, where she faced charges for marriage fraud, visa violations, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The baby had turned out to be Tommy's, a fact that simplified some legal issues while creating others. Her Instagram influencer career was definitively over. Tommy Wallace had used his share of the recovered assets to start a legitimate construction business. He sent Beth Christmas cards now, along with photos of his daughter and updates on his ex-wife's legal troubles. Beth's new life was quieter than her old one, but infinitely more satisfying. She'd returned to private investigation work, specializing in corporate fraud cases for clients who appreciated her particular skill set. Her reputation for thoroughness and discretion had followed her across the country, and she had more work than she could handle. Her doorbell rang at exactly noon, as it had every Saturday for the past 2 months. "You're punctual as always," she said, opening the door to find Stuart Goodwin holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of wine. "Some things are worth being punctual for," he said, kissing her cheek. Stuart had been the only board member at Hendricks Development to escape criminal charges, partly because he'd genuinely been kept in the dark about the worst of Jason's crimes, and partly because Beth had vouched for his ignorance with investigators. He'd lost his job and his reputation in the financial industry, but he'd kept his freedom and his integrity. More importantly, he'd proven to be a man who learned from his mistakes. "Any word from our mutual ex-colleagues?" he asked as they settled on her back porch with lunch. "Jason's appealing his sentence. Blake's trying to get transferred to a minimum security facility. Candy's pregnant again, this time definitely with Tommy's child. And you? Any regrets?" Beth looked out at the Blue Ridge Mountains, where autumn was painting the landscape in brilliant shades of gold and red. She bought this house with her share of the divorce settlement, and every morning she woke up to views that reminded her why starting over had been worth everything it cost. "None," she said. "You? Just one. I wish I'd been smart enough to see what was happening and brave enough to stop it before it went so far." "You weren't complicit, Stuart. You were just naive about how far some people will go when they think they can't be caught. And now I know better. Now I know that the most dangerous people are often the ones who seem most respectable on the surface." Stuart reached across the table and took her hand. "For what it's worth, I think Jason never deserved you. Jason never knew me. He knew the version of me that he wanted to see, but he never bothered to understand who I really was. His loss. Definitely his loss." Beth's phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a CEO who suspected his business partner was embezzling funds. She glanced at the message and smiled. Work? Stewart asked. Always. But good work. The kind that helps people instead of enabling them. Will you take the case? Probably. But not until Monday. Weekends are for better things. Such as? Beth looked at Stewart, this kind and honest man who'd lost everything because he'd trusted the wrong people and who'd somehow found the courage to trust again. She thought about Jason, rotting in federal prison and probably still blaming everyone except himself for his situation. She thought about the life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage and the future that stretched ahead of her like an unwritten story, such as remembering that intelligence without wisdom is just elaborate stupidity, she said, and that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something better from what's left behind. Stewart squeezed her hand. I like the sound of that. Good, Beth said, squeezing back, because I'm just getting started. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of hope and possibility, Beth Hendricks, soon to be Beth McKay again, raised her wine glass in a toast to second chances and the wisdom that comes from surviving your own naivety. Behind her, the house that would never be a showpiece, but would always be a home settled into evening stillness. Ahead of her, a future stretched out like an uncharted territory, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the life she'd earned the right to live. It was, she thought, a pretty good trade for a marriage that had never been worth saving anyway.
And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.